Hi everyone, Brian here, wishing you a wonderful Monday and a great week ahead. In this video series, we're looking at, momentarily, we're looking at the book of Proverbs, but we're investigating Holy Scripture as a source of insight and teaching about the nature of the human soul. It really is my belief and concern that the modern world kind of gnawed away at reflecting on human soulfulness, or for that matter, the soulfulness of the entire creation as God sees it. That happened because of a lot of modern trends in both philosophy and science that became very concrete and very practical oriented. The physical sciences that began to say human life will be better if we focus on what can be seen and measured and then studied, manipulated for our own use, especially around energy and the conversion of raw materials into useful tools for humanity. Again, just like we're saying, the other understandings of Bible as the story of the people of God, our theological basis, our sort of source of moral outlook, those are still there in Scripture. And of course, the work of science and philosophy is still there and very helpful. And you know, nobody can deny the great strides forward of the modern era. But that emphasis on the concrete, what can be seen, what can be manipulated, what can be studied in terms of a scientific and concrete worldview, and a purely humanistic one, sort of overwhelmed our trust in and reliance on and interaction with the human soul. It kind of got relegated, if it exists at all for people, it kind of got relegated to the sentimental. You know, isn't it nice that we find things beautiful or significant or joyous in our life? That's sort of like the icing on the cake, but it's not really the cake at all. It's just the fluff that keeps us perhaps a little happier in life. But it really, and that means that in that sense, we've really lost its poignancy, its potency. And if you go back and read Scripture without reference to the soul, it really does become either just a history book written by pretty poor historians, or a theological study written by non-theologians, or a book of morals that are pretty contradictory if you read from one end to the other. So it's little wonder to me that people have found reading the Bible to be more controversial and difficult in the 21st century than supportive and helpful as it has been in the past. And that's because we've lost, I think, the sense of reading it as a place of wisdom that tells us the truth about ourselves. And the truth is we do have a soul, that the world is a godly place, that such things as beauty and significance, decency, justice, hope, are real things at work. They're not just human constructs. Although, of course, we've turned our society into instruments that either serve those constructs well or don't, like justice and decency. We've made them part of our human construct, but in so doing, I think people have said that's all it is. It's just a world we've created. But once you have God back in your life, you understand that all of those things are very real, and you're entering into a deeper, richer, more poignant, and more authentic experience of real life. So we're up to chapter 8 in Proverbs. I'm not going to read through every chapter, by the way. We're just going to look at some of the viewpoints here that help us, but we've certainly looked at the first 8 chapters. I'm going to read today from Eugene Peterson's translation called The Message. It's one of those times when please go back and read it. It's chapter 8, or the first few verses of chapter 8, in the New Revised Standard Version. That's the one we use in church. But sometimes the language gets so churchy or churchified, or we've heard it in such a churchified way, that I think we get to hear it a little fresher in this translation. The point I hope we can get from here, I want to suggest to you that every time you hear the word wisdom, you will think of the voice of the soul, and not just how to be smart or savvy, or to have what we think of it today of having acquired wisdom over many years of life, etc. That's all very true and helpful, but it's not really what the book of Proverbs is talking about. When it says wisdom, it really is talking about the discipline of being able to hear that voice of the soul. And so if we could hear it with that concept in mind, I think a lot of things about how the soul works and how we ought to listen to it, etc., bubbles to the surface. So here are the first few verses of chapter 8 of the book of Proverbs. Do you hear Lady Wisdom calling? Can you hear Madam Insight raising her voice? She's taken her stand at First and Main, at the busiest intersection. Right in the city square where the traffic is thickest, she shouts, "You! I'm talking to you, everyone out here on the streets. Listen, you idiots, learn good sense. You blockheads, shape up. Don't miss a word of this. I'm telling you how to live well. I'm telling you how to live at your best. My mouth chews and savors and relishes truth. I can't stand the taste of evil. You'll only hear true and right words from my mouth. Not one syllable will be twisted or skewed. You'll recognize this as true, you with open minds. Truth-ready minds will see it at once. Prefer my life disciplines over chasing after money, and God knowledge over a lucrative career. For wisdom is better than all the trappings of wealth. Nothing you could wish for holds a candle to her. I am Lady Wisdom, and I live next to sanity. Knowledge and discretion live just down the street. The fear of God means hating evil, whose ways I hate with a passion. Pride and arrogance and crooked talk. Good counsel and common sense are my characteristics. I am both insight and the virtue to live it out. With my help, leaders rule and lawmakers legislate fairly. With my help, governors govern, along with all in legitimate authority. I love those who love me. Those who look for me find me. Wealth and glory accompany me, also substantial honor and a good name. My benefits are worth more than a big salary, even a very big salary. The returns on me exceed any imaginable bonus. You can find me on Righteous Road, that's where I walk, at the intersection of Justice Avenue, handing out life to those who love me, filling their arms with life, armloads of life. So, lovely, lovely, lovely passage. So once again, let's just ponder for a moment if this voice that's calling us to this discipline of insight and virtue and discretion and knowledge and looking for decency and goodness, we tend in the West to think all of those things are outside of us, and we have to either learn them from somebody or from some book or from some source of authority that's outside of us. And certainly there is that element to it, but we have not recently taught, and perhaps the church has always been very poor at teaching this, that inside every human being there is access to this voice of generosity, of truth. Even if that voice every once in a while is sort of yelling at us, how can you have been so mistaken? Now, there's a difference between guilt and shame and that voice of the soul. The soul doesn't really work through those two efforts, although sometimes they will sound a little bit finger-wagging, but they won't create guilt or shame. Guilt or shame does come from outside. We're not living up to somebody's hope or expectation of us. We've perhaps disobeyed a rule or even a law that we're going to get in trouble for. We've made a social faux pas, or we've disappointed people in some way. And then we end up feeling guilty about it, and if it becomes a pattern in our life, ashamed. The soul never, ever, ever makes use of that. So if you're feeling motivated by guilt or shame, it's not that you shouldn't perhaps look at it, but it's not the voice of the soul. Even when the voice of the soul is saying, "You idiot, how could you have missed my voice in that moment? I've been yelling at you for quite some time." I promise you that when the voice of the soul says that, you'll chuckle because you'll recognize that you've been a bit of, as Eugene Peterson calls us here, you've been a bit of a blockhead. It reminds me that I've often said, if you do auricular confession in the traditional way in the Episcopal Church, it's often with head bowed and eyes closed, and the symbol of absolution is the making of the cross. But I really think it should be that sort of head up, eyes open, whacking ourselves, saying, "Oh my God, I could have done life differently," and sort of have that joyous moment of realizing I could start over in a healthier, more whole way. So this is really a wonderful passage that tells us just exactly what the soul says and how it says it and what to watch for. And what that helps us do is create a discipline of discernment. Part of the reason people don't trust the soul so much in the modern world is they think that it's probably just another part of their own brain trying to convince themselves. Something like those images of I always remember the Fred Flintstone cartoons where there was a little devil Fred trying to get him to do one thing and a little angelic Fred trying to get him to do another thing. And we kind of think that, these kind of battles that go on in our brains is where soulfulness is to be found. It really isn't. Soulfulness has to be, it's not part of our conscious mind, it's not our everyday thinking, although it bubbles up into consciousness. And we have to learn that discipline to discern what it is. It's the core of, by the way, what monks and now a lot of people do, called Lectio Divina, which is reading Holy Scripture until all of a sudden we trust that Scripture has a word for us in it, and that's discernment. Same thing Quakers do at a Quaker meeting. They sit in silence, and what they're doing is learning the discipline of discernment. When do I have something that is meaningful and significant to say? It's fun to read this and recognize that the soul is right there, and our capacity for learning discernment is right at our fingertips, and that the soul is, I love this image, at the main intersection of our lives. It is not an esoteric thing that you climb a mountain and have a ooey experience of, though sometimes that's it. But it really has connection to what we're doing in life and brings not only a depth of meaning and richness to that life, but a real touch of the divine spirit right into our everyday lives. So take a dip into chapter 8 and see if you can't find some element of soulfulness there for you. Have a great week. God bless, and I'll see you again next Monday.